Today, I can tell the House that the £12 billion of welfare savings we committed to at the election will be delivered in full.
George Osborne has just set out the UK's spending plans for up to the year 2020. Billions of pounds of cuts were announced, but there was new money for defence and security. And Mr Osborne scrapped the planned £4.4 billion worth of cuts to tax credits, which had been rejected by the House of Lords.
Well, it was a U-turn of epic proportions. George Osborne had announced back in July that he was planning to remove £4.4 billion of tax credits from working families, created uproar in the Labour Party, uproar in the House of Lords over there, but most importantly, criticism from Conservative MPs. They thought he was going to soften the blow of this change on the working families, but in fact what he did, he completely scrapped it. He removed it altogether, and the House of Commons was momentarily silent because nobody expected him to be able to find the money to make such a massive change, which means, interestingly, he'll breach his own cap on welfare spending, a cap which he essentially set as a trap for the Labour Party 2 years ago. He's now walked into himself.
So how did Mr Osborne do it? Well, better than expected forecasts plus tax rises gave the government the cash needed to spend on the U-turn.
You could argue it's judgment or you could argue it's luck. The Office for Budget Responsibility basically said that George Osborne was £27 billion better off than anyone had expected. They said that tax revenues were going to be better than people thought and that the government was going to be spending less money on servicing its debt over the next few years. That gave him £27 billion to play with over the Parliament. Now, rather than banking that or using to pay down the deficit, George Osborne basically spent most of it. So that's how he managed to sort out the tax credits problem. The second thing is deep in the detail of what we used to call the Red Book, but in fact it's a Blue Book this year, the budget details. There are a series of quite interesting little tax rises, stealth tax rises, if you like, which will help bring more money into the Treasury.
The Business Department is set to have its funding cut by 17%, but Mr Osborne did announce 26 new or extended enterprise zones. But how did the rest of the statements go down with British business?
Well, I think the thing that business really will welcome is the fact that the Chancellor is still balancing the books over this Parliament and that there's a focus on longer term investment in the economy, particularly protecting the science budget in real terms. I think that was really important, and the focus on infrastructure and innovation. I think the real sting in the tail for business is the wider size and scope of the apprenticeship levy. I think a lot more smaller businesses will be captured within that they may not have been expecting it. It's good that we have a levy board so that business can work with government on some of the implementation of the levy, but ultimately it is a tax on some of these businesses.
So what did the Labour Party make of it? In his first set-piece event as Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell warned that the cuts to government spending announced today would be damaging.
It's a smoke and mirrors budget where we won't see the detail until we look much more closely. But if we take one example that business will be concerned about, I'm sure, is that the proposed investment in transport that he promised in 2013 of 70 billion looks actually like a disguised cut when he's now saying 61 billion. So I am sure that people will want to look at the detail and look closely at what he's saying to see what actually he's proposing and whether that's a cut and whether he's investing in the right things for the future.
Probably the biggest headline to come out of this year's autumn statement that's being discussed in the media village behind me is Mr Osborne's climb down on his planned cuts to tax credits. His critics will say the Chancellor performed a U-turn. Mr Osborne says he's a Chancellor who listens. Daniel Garrahan, Financial Times, Westminster.